The laughter hit me before I even finished speaking. 200 voices, 200 species, all laughing at once, and every single one of them was laughing at Earth. My name is Helen Carter. I have been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 30 years. In those 30 years, I have been insulted in 14 languages. I have been kept waiting in hallways while junior delegates walked past me. I have been seated at the back of the chamber, behind species that joined the council decades after we did. I learned to smile through all of it. That was my job. Smile, stay calm, and keep Earth in the room. But I had never heard the whole chamber laugh at us in unison. Not until that day. Let me take you back to the morning it happened, because the day that broke the galaxy in half began like any other. I ate toast in my small embassy kitchen. I argued with my aide, Laura Grant, about whether my speech was too long, and she won, and I cut 2 paragraphs. I took the tram to the council spire, and a Drell customs officer checked my credentials twice, as they always did with humans and never with anyone else, and I smiled at him, as I always did, because the smile was armor and I had worn it so long I barely felt its weight anymore. I remember thinking, as the great doors of the chamber opened before me, that today might finally be different. I had evidence. I had sacrifice. I had a case so strong that even the proudest species would have to nod. I was 62 years old. I had given my whole life to this work, and I still believed, that morning, that fairness was a matter of proof. I want you to remember that version of me, the woman who walked through those doors believing. She does not survive this story. Someone harder walks out. It started with a simple request. 3 months earlier, a pirate fleet had attacked the Meridian Gate, the busiest travel point in this part of the galaxy. Every species that used that gate depended on it for trade, for food shipments, for medicine. When the pirates came, the alien defense crews pulled back and waited for orders. The human crews did not wait. They held the gate for 9 days. They held it until help arrived. Many of them never came home. So Earth made a request. We asked for a seat on the security tier, the inner circle of the council, the group that makes the real decisions. We had earned it. Our people had paid for it. All I had to do was stand before the council and ask. I stood at the speaker's platform in the center of the great chamber. The room rose around me in circles, level after level of delegates, like the inside of a giant shell. Light from the twin suns of the capital world poured through the crystal ceiling. I gave my speech. I kept it short. I listed what human crews had done at the gate. I asked for the seat. Then High Arbiter Sis Kell rose to answer. Sis Kell was the leader of the Vithari, the oldest and proudest species in the council. He was tall and thin, with silver skin and 4 golden eyes that never blinked. When he spoke, the whole chamber went quiet, because his word was usually the final word. He did not answer my request. Instead, he lifted a data pad, and he began to read. He read the names of our dead. At first, I did not understand what he was doing. Then I heard the tone in his voice. He was not reading with respect. He was reading with amusement. He read the name of a young pilot from Kenya who had flown her damaged ship into the path of a pirate cruiser to protect a cargo vessel full of alien families. He paused after her name, looked up at the chamber, and said, she was 23 years old. 23. They send children to die for strangers, and then they come here asking for a chair. A ripple of laughter went through the upper levels. He read another name. A station engineer from Manchester who had stayed behind to keep the gate's shields running, while everyone else escaped. Skell tilted his head and said, he was not even a soldier. He fixed machines. He died fixing machines for people who do not know his name. And then, the line I will never forget, the line that changed everything. He spread his long arms wide and said, they bleed for free. Why should we pay them with a seat? That was when the whole chamber laughed. Not a few voices. Not one section. All of them. The sound rolled down from the highest circle to the lowest, wave after wave, and it crashed over me where I stood alone at the platform. I want to tell you what that felt like, because it matters for everything that came after. It did not feel like anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. It moved through me slowly, like ice water filling a glass. I stood completely still. My face did not change. My hands did not shake. 30 years of training held me in place. But inside, something was happening. I was making a list. I looked up at the laughing faces, and I named them to myself, one by one. The Drell delegation, whose farming worlds were saved from famine 6 years ago by human cargo pilots who flew through a radiation storm no other crews would enter. Laughing. The Osani, whose plague ship was boarded and cured by human medical teams when every other species refused to go near it. Laughing. The Core, whose lost colony ship was found in deep space by a human rescue crew that searched for 4 months after everyone else gave up. Laughing hardest of all. I stood there and I counted them. Every debt, every rescue, every dirty, dangerous, thankless job that humans had done for 60 years, while the great species of the Council sat in their beautiful chamber and told each other how wise they were. You see, when Earth joined the Council, we were the newest members, the youngest species, the ones with the smallest fleet and the least advanced technology. So we were given the work nobody else wanted. We signed treaty after treaty, and each one handed us another task. The Relay Maintenance Treaty put human crews on the communication stations in deep space, the loneliest posts in the galaxy, keeping the signals flowing between 1,000 worlds. The Rescue Accord made human ships the first responders for every distress call in the outer regions. The Quarantine Protocol sent human doctors onto plague ships that other species would not even look at. The patrol agreements put human sensor crews on the far edge of known space, watching the darkness beyond the rim, the first line of warning for everyone. 91 treaties. I knew them all. I had signed most of them myself. Each one was a chain, and each chain pulled a little more human labor into the machinery of the galaxy. And the strange thing, the thing the Council never understood, is that we did not complain. Humans took the hard jobs and did them well, because that is what we do. We thought, in time, they would see our worth. We thought respect was something you could earn. Standing in that chamber, with their laughter pouring down on me, I finally understood. Respect was never coming. Not this year, not in 100 years. To them, we would always be the useful little species, the ones who bleed for free. Skell raised one hand, and the laughter faded, the way it always did when he wanted the floor. He looked down at me with his 4 golden eyes, and his voice turned smooth and almost kind, which somehow made it worse. Ambassador Carter, he said, the Council values Earth's enthusiasm. Truly, your people have a certain energy that we all find useful, but the security tier is for species with wisdom, with history, with weight, perhaps in another 1,000 years. He let the words hang in the air, and then he added, the petition of Earth is denied. Is there any other business? I heard delegates gathering their things. The session was ending. In their minds, the matter was closed, and by tomorrow, they would not even remember it. That is what stung the most. To them, this was nothing, a small joke in a long day. They had laughed at the names of our dead, and they would go home and sleep well. I thought about the pilot from Kenya. I thought about her family, who had received a folded flag and a message of thanks from Earth's government, and nothing at all from the Council she died protecting. I thought about the engineer from Manchester. I thought about a promise I had made a long time ago, to an old man who taught me everything I know. His name was Arthur Finch. He was Earth's first ambassador, the man who negotiated our entry into the Council 60 years ago. Everyone here had thought he was a fool. He was a small, quiet man who wore old suits and drank too much tea, and the alien delegates used to joke about him the way they joked about all of us. But Arthur Finch was nobody's fool. When he signed those first treaties, he insisted on adding one small clause to every single one. The other species let him have it, because they thought it was meaningless. They were in a hurry, and he was patient, and patience always wins. I was his assistant in his final years. One evening, near the end, he told me something I have carried ever since. He said, Helen, one day they will go too far. Not with weapons, with words. They will laugh at the wrong thing, and on that day, you must not shout and you must not cry. You must simply open the book and read. He tapped the treaty files on his desk. Dignity is the only treaty that can never be renegotiated. Guard it. I had asked him what he meant. He only smiled and said, Article 7. You will know when. Now, standing at the platform with the chamber emptying around me, I knew when. The when was now. I raised my hand and pressed the request light at the speaker's platform. The soft chime rang through the chamber. Delegates paused, halfway out of their seats. Skell looked down at me with mild surprise, the way you look at a pet that has done something unexpected. Ambassador Carter, he said, the session is closing. What is it? I kept my voice level, calm, almost gentle. High Arbiter, I said, I request the floor for a brief procedural statement. 5 minutes, no more. A few delegates chuckled. Someone in the Drell section said something I could not hear, and the delegates around him laughed. Seskell's golden eyes glimmered with amusement. He was in a good mood. The joke had gone well. He waved one long hand, granting me the time the way a rich man tosses a coin. 5 minutes, he said. Do try to be interesting, Ambassador. I said, I will do my best. I reached into my case and took out a single old book with a worn blue cover. It was Arthur Finch's personal copy of the founding treaties, the one he left to me in his will. The delegates settled back into their seats, still smiling, expecting one last bit of entertainment from the humans before dinner. I opened the book to the page Arthur had marked 60 years ago, and I began to read. Every treaty between Earth and this council, I said, contains a clause known as Article 7. It was written by Ambassador Arthur Finch and accepted by every signing species. I will now read it aloud, since it appears that many of you have never done so. The chamber was still relaxed. A few delegates were already reading messages on their pads. I read slowly, so every translator in the room could carry my words clearly. Article 7. Either party may withdraw from this treaty at any time, fully and immediately, by open declaration before the assembled council. No vote is required, no notice period is required, no approval is required. Upon declaration, all duties, services, and obligations of the withdrawing party end at once. I closed the book softly and looked up. Under the authority of the government of Earth, I said, and in accordance with Article 7, I hereby declare Earth's full and immediate withdrawal from the following treaties. For a moment, nobody reacted. I think they believed it was a joke, a bit of human theater. Then I began the list, and I read it in alphabetical order, in a flat, steady voice, the voice of a woman reading a shopping list. The Accord of Deep Void Rescue, withdrawn. The Agreement of Border Sensor Maintenance, withdrawn. The Charter of Relay Station Service, withdrawn. Somewhere around the 4th treaty, the pads went down. Around the 7th, the chamber went completely silent. By the 12th, the silence broke, and the shouting began. A Drell delegate was on his feet, waving his arms, yelling that this was out of order. The core section was calling for the arbiter to stop the session. I did not stop. I did not raise my voice. I simply kept reading, name after name, treaty after treaty, and my calm was louder than all their noise. The Compact of Quarantine Response, withdrawn. The Convention of Emergency Cargo Transport, withdrawn. The Covenant of Frontier Patrol, withdrawn. I watched the realization spread through the chamber. I will tell you exactly what it looked like, because I will remember it until the day I die. It looked like frost crossing a window. It started in the lower circles, where the working delegates sat, the ones who actually understood how the galaxy ran day to day. Their faces changed first. Then it climbed, level by level, section by section, up toward the proud old species at the top, freezing every smile as it went. Because here is what they were all suddenly remembering, one by one, in the privacy of their own racing minds. Who keeps the relay stations running? Humans. Who answers the distress calls in the outer regions? Humans. Who boards the plague ships? Who patrols the rim? Who repairs the deep sensors? Who carries the emergency cargo through the storms? Humans, humans, humans. 60 years of treaties had quietly braided human labor into every system the galaxy depended on, and nobody had noticed, because nobody ever notices the people who do the hard work. You only notice them when they stop. The Treaty of Gate Defense Support, withdrawn. That one landed like a physical blow. I heard a sound go through the chamber, a low sound of actual fear, because everyone in that room remembered the Meridian Gate, and everyone knew who had held it. Sekel was on his feet now. Ambassador Carter, he said, and for the first time in 30 years, I heard his smooth voice crack at the edge. This is not procedure, this is sabotage. The Council demands that you stop this reading at once. I looked up at him. The Council granted me 5 minutes, I said. I have used 3, and then I went back to the list. They tried everything while I read. You must understand, I did not read those 91 treaties in silence. I read them through a storm. Delegates shouted legal objections, and I read. The Osani representative demanded an emergency vote, and I read. A senior corps minister came down from his section, actually came down to the platform, and stood beside me, whispering offers. A trade package, a partial seat, observer status on the security tier, reconsideration of the petition. I did not even turn my head. I read. The Vithari themselves tried last. Their second delegate, a diplomat named Ves Oren who had always been more polite than the rest, called out across the chamber, "Ambassador, please. Whatever insult was given today, let us repair it with words. Do not do this." Some of us have always respected Earth. For 1 second, only one, I paused. Because she was not lying. There had always been a few, here and there, who treated us fairly. I found her face in the crowd, and I said quietly, "Then you will understand better than anyone why I cannot stop." And I read on. The last treaty was the understanding of Waterworld relief. I read its name, I said the word withdrawn, and then I closed Arthur Finch's old blue book for the final time in that chamber. 91 treaties, I said, 91 declarations. All valid under Article 7, which every one of your governments signed. Earth's obligations to this council ended 1 minute ago. I looked around the chamber slowly, taking my time, meeting the eyes I had counted during their laughter. You asked me to be interesting, I said. I hope that was sufficient. I stepped down from the platform. Nobody stopped me. 200 species watched me walk up the long central aisle, and not one of them made a sound. My footsteps were the only noise in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, and I confess, I enjoyed every single one of them. Outside, in the corridor, my aide Laura Grant was waiting. She was young, sharp, and she had been listening to the feed. Her face was pale, and her eyes were enormous. "Ma'am," she whispered, "did you really just do that?" "Send the signal," I said. She had the transmitter ready. One encrypted message, prepared years ago by people wiser than me, sitting in a locked file waiting for a day we hoped would never come. One word, sent to every human crew on every station, every relay post, every rescue ship, every patrol boat across the entire galaxy. The word was home. Laura pressed the key, and the word went out at light speed in every direction, and across thousands of stations and ships. Human men and women read it, understood it, and began, calmly and without a single act of anger, to pack their things. That evening, before the feeds began to fill with empty stations, I made the call I had been both dreading and awaiting. The face of Earth's president, a steady woman named Eleanor Shaw, appeared on my secure screen. She had been woken in the middle of the night, and she listened without interrupting while I reported exactly what I had done, in her name and Earth's, with a 60-year-old clause and 5 minutes of granted time. When I finished, there was a pause that lasted years. Then she said, "Helen, I have read the transcript twice on the way to this call. I have only one correction to offer." I straightened, ready for anything. "You said Earth's obligations ended 1 minute ago," she said. "You should have said 60 years of patience ended. The obligations we will decide for ourselves, freely, from now on." That is the difference between a species walking out and a species standing up. She smiled then, tired and fierce at once. The signal has my full authority. Bring them all home. And Helen, she added, just before the screen went dark, when the council comes asking, and they will come asking, remember that you hold the door now. Take your time opening it. I want you to picture what happened over the next several hours, because the council certainly did. They watched it on their own monitoring feeds, live, in that same silent chamber, long into the night. On Relay Station 40, out in the deep void, a human engineer named Daniel Brooks finished his shift, logged the systems as stable, left a polite note for whoever came next, and walked to the transport dock with his crew. On the Plague Watch platform above the Osani border, human doctors sealed their labs properly, filed their reports, transferred their patients safely into stable care, and boarded shuttles. At the Meridian Gate itself, the human defense crews, the sisters and brothers of the dead, whose names had been read as a joke that very morning, powered down their weapon stations, saluted the gate once, and left their posts in perfect order. No sabotage, no angry speeches, no slammed doors. That was the part that frightened the council most, I think. Humans did not leave like enemies. We left like professionals. We left every station cleaner than we found it, and that told the galaxy something chilling. This was not a tantrum that would pass in a week. This was a decision. There was one moment from that night that the whole galaxy would end up watching, replayed millions of times. On Junction Station 9, a major transfer hub, the local council commander, a Drell officer, physically blocked the exit corridor and ordered the human staff to remain at their posts, citing galactic law. The station's human chief of operations, a calm gray-haired man named Edward Hart, who had run that junction for 22 years without a single day of failure, listened politely with his travel bag on his shoulder. Then he asked one question, and the station's own security recording caught every word. "Commander," he said, "which treaty are you citing?" The Drell officer began to answer, stopped, checked his pad, checked it again, and found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The law he was standing on had ceased to exist at midday. Edward Hart nodded kindly, the way you nod to a student who has just worked out the answer for himself, stepped around him and said, "The systems are stable, and the handover notes are on my desk. Good luck, Commander. I mean that sincerely." And he walked his entire crew to the transport, past a line of council officers who had just discovered that all their authority over humans had been written on paper, and the paper was gone. By dawn, the feeds showed empty corridors on 100 stations, chairs pushed neatly under desks, screens blinking softly with no one to watch them. All across the galaxy, the quiet hum of human work, a sound so constant that nobody had ever noticed it, simply stopped. I stood at the window of the Earth Embassy that morning, drinking tea from Arthur Finch's old cup, and I watched the council spire glitter in the light of the twin suns. Somewhere inside it, 200 species were beginning to do something they had not done in a very long time. They were beginning to count how much they needed us, and I had all the time in the world to let them finish counting. The galaxy did not fall apart with a bang. It fell apart with a series of small, quiet clicks, like a great machine losing one screw at a time. I kept a private journal of those 30 days. I am going to share it with you now, because the Council's official records tell a very different story, and I was there for the truth. Day 4. The first click. The relay network began to lag. Messages between star systems, which normally arrived within minutes, started taking hours. The relay stations were still running on automatic systems, but automatic systems drift, and there were no human hands left to correct them. A trade deal between two major worlds collapsed that day because the confirmation message arrived too late. It was a small thing, nobody panicked yet, but in shipping offices across the galaxy, people began to check the news feeds a little more often. Day 6. The Council issued its first official statement. It called Earth's withdrawal a temporary misunderstanding and expressed confidence that services would resume shortly. I read it aloud to Laura over breakfast, and we both agreed it was beautifully written. Confidence is easy to write. It is harder to fly. Day 9. The first real alarm. A freight vessel near the Osani border reported sickness on board and requested quarantine response. Under the old treaty, a human medical team would have been on their way within the hour. Humans always went. It was what we did. This time, the call went to the new replacement crew, a Vithari team assigned by the council with great ceremony the week before. The Vithari crew reviewed the report, classified the mission as high risk, and requested additional safety guarantees before launch. Then they requested updated equipment. Then they requested a review of the hazard pay structure. The sick ship drifted for 3 days while the paperwork moved back and forth. In the end, an independent trader took pity and towed the vessel to a medical station. The people on board survived, thankfully. But the story spread from port to port at the speed of gossip, and it carried a simple message. The safety net is gone. The humans were the safety net, and the net is gone. Day 12. The Council tried threats. They announced legal action against Earth for breach of galactic duty, demanding payment for damages. Our response was 1 page long. It listed the exact wording of Article 7, followed by the signatures of every species that had accepted it, followed by a single sentence. Earth wishes the Council success in suing a clause that 91 of its own governments signed. I am told that response was framed and hung on a wall somewhere in our foreign ministry. I neither confirm nor deny that I requested a copy. Day 15. The threats became sanctions. The Council voted to freeze Earth out of galactic trade lanes until services resumed. It was meant to be their hammer blow, and it might have been, except for one small detail that apparently nobody in the chamber had checked before the vote. The sanction enforcement fleet, the ships that were supposed to patrol the trade lanes and stop human vessels, was 40% human crewed. Or rather, it had been, until day 1. The remaining crews could barely keep the fleet running, let alone expand its patrols. The sanctions existed on paper and nowhere else. Human trade ships flew wherever they pleased, waving politely at the understaffed patrol boats as they passed. Day 17. The pirates came back to the Meridian Gate. I want to be fair in telling this part. The alien defense crews at the gate were not cowards. They were ordinary people with families, doing a job, but they had been trained for years to operate in a system where humans took the dangerous forward positions. That was how every battle plan was written. Human crews absorb the first strike, hold the line, and buy time. Every strategy, every drill, every plan assumed we would be there. When the pirate fleet appeared on the scanners, the defense crews opened their battle plans and found holes shaped exactly like human beings. They did not hold the gate. They pulled back to protect the inner stations, which was the sensible choice, and the pirates spent 6 hours looting the outer cargo platforms before leaving at their leisure. Nobody died, and for that I was grateful. But the footage of pirate ships calmly helping themselves to council cargo, at the most important gate in the region, played on every news feed on 1,000 worlds. The galaxy's sense of safety, built over 60 years, cracked in a single afternoon. Day 18. The tone changed. The council stopped issuing statements about misunderstandings, and the first private delegation arrived at my embassy. It was the Drell, the ones whose farming worlds we had once saved from famine. Their senior minister requested a personal meeting, hinting at generous new terms. I did not meet him. Instead, I sent the letter. Ah, the letter. I should explain the letter, because it became rather famous. In the first week after the withdrawal, I knew the requests for meetings would come, first as a trickle, then as a flood. I decided that every request, from every species, regardless of rank, would receive exactly the same response. I wrote it myself, and I polished every word until it shone. It read as follows. The Embassy of Earth thanks you for your kind interest in a meeting. At present, Earth has no treaty obligations requiring diplomatic consultation, and therefore no urgent matters to discuss. We are certain that a council of such wisdom, history, and weight will manage its affairs admirably. Earth wishes you continued success. With warmest regards, Helen Carter, Ambassador. Every word of it was polite. Every word of it was a mirror. Wisdom, history, and weight were the exact words Siskel had used when he denied us our seat. I wanted every minister who read that letter to hear his voice, and their own laughter echoing behind my courtesy. Day 19 through 25. The flood. The core came, then the Osani, then a joint delegation of 11 smaller species, then the Drell again, this time offering to sponsor Earth's seat on the security tier themselves. Each of them received the letter. Laura printed copies in advance and kept them in a neat stack by the door. She began to time how long each delegation stared at the letter before leaving. The record was held by a core trade minister, who stood in our lobby reading those 4 sentences over and over for 11 minutes, as if a secret exit might be hidden between the words. Not every message that reached us in those days came from the proud ones, and I want to record the exceptions, because they mattered. On day 22, a small delegation arrived from the Miru, a gentle species of low-gravity worlds, so minor in council politics that most delegates could not have pointed to their seats. They did not request a meeting. They did not ask for services. They left a single container at our embassy door and departed. Inside were flowers, real ones, grown in their own greenhouses, and a card written in careful, imperfect human script. It said, "Our colony ship was the one your rescue crew searched 4 months to find. Our grandparents were aboard. We never laughed. We wanted you to know that we never laughed." I kept that card. It sits on my desk to this day, and on hard mornings I read it before I read anything else. And on day 24, a private message arrived through channels so quiet that even Laura almost missed it. It was from Ves Oren, the Vithari second delegate, the one who had called out to me during the reading. It was 3 sentences, unsigned but unmistakable. "There are more of us than you think who are ashamed. The old ones will bend, but they must not see the young ones pushing, or they will lock their pride and never move. Give him a reason that lets him keep his dignity, and he will surprise you." I read it many times. I did not answer it. But I remembered it at the moment it mattered most, and if she ever reads this account, I hope she recognizes her fingerprints on everything that followed. I know how this sounds. It sounds like I was enjoying myself. And I will be honest with you, because I promised myself I would tell this story honestly. Some days, I did enjoy it. After 30 years of standing in the back of the room, there was a fierce satisfaction in watching the proud ones wait in my lobby. I am not a saint. I never claimed to be. But then came the night of day 26, and I stopped enjoying anything at all. Day 28 brought me the strangest reading material of my career. Someone inside the council, and to this day I do not know who, leaked the transcript of their closed emergency session to the public feeds. I suspect Ves Oren, but she has never confirmed it, and I have never asked. The transcript ran for hours, and the galaxy read every word. In it, the council's own economists reported that replacing human services would take a minimum of 15 years and cost more than the combined annual budgets of 40 member worlds, because it was not only labor that had walked away. It was 60 years of accumulated skill, the kind that cannot be hired, only grown. One passage was quoted everywhere, an exchange between a Drell minister and the chief economist. The minister asked, "What did we pay the humans for all this?" The economist answered, "Standard service rates, minister, the lowest tier." The minister was silent for a moment, and then he said, quietly, into the official record, "Then we were never wealthy. We were subsidized by people we seated in the back row." The transcript ends with nobody answering him, and I think that silence taught the galaxy more than my whole career of speeches. That night, a passenger ship suffered an engine failure in the outer regions, far from any station. It broadcast a distress call on the emergency channel, the channel that human rescue ships had monitored for 60 years. The call went out, and for the first time in 60 years, nobody was listening on the other end. The nearest council vessel was 4 days away. The ship's air systems were failing. The rescue crews of Earth had been ordered home like everyone else, but they had kept their old scanners on, quietly, unofficially, because rescue crews are rescue crews down to their bones. A retired human rescue captain named Margaret Hale, who now ran a private cargo ship, picked up the distress call, turned her vessel around, and flew 30 hours at maximum burn. She reached the stranded ship in time. Every passenger survived. When the news services asked her why she had gone, without a treaty, without pay, without orders, she looked into the camera with tired eyes and said, "Because someone called for help." What kind of question is that? I watched that interview alone in my office at 2 in the morning, and then I sat for a long time in the dark. I need you to understand what that night was like, because a story like mine can sound clean and triumphant, and the truth was not clean. The truth was a knot in my stomach. Those passengers had nearly died inside the empty space where our treaties used to be. Next time, there might be no Margaret Hale flying nearby. Next time, the count of the lost might not be 0, and the order that emptied those rescue stations had come, in the end, from a book I opened, in a chamber, on a day when my pride was bleeding. So I asked myself the hard question, the one I had been avoiding for 26 days. Helen, is this pride? Are people going to be put in danger across the galaxy so that one insulted diplomat could feel tall for a season? I turned the question over for hours, honestly, the way Arthur taught me to examine everything. Near dawn, I found my answer, and I wrote it in my journal, and I will give it to you word for word. It was never about pride. It was about precedent. If they could laugh at our dead once and pay nothing, they would laugh forever. Every future generation of humans would live in a galaxy that had learned, officially and publicly, that human loss is comedy and human service is free. That lesson had to be unlearned, completely, at any cost, or our children would pay it in ways far worse than this. Kindness without respect is not partnership. It is servitude with good manners, and I will not sign my species up for servitude, no matter how politely the chains are offered. I learned later, from sources I will protect, what had been happening inside the council spire during those final days, and it explains everything about what came next. The old order was eating itself. On day 29, 3 of the great species moved openly against S's Kell, blaming him and his moment of laughter for the collapse of 60 years of comfortable arrangements. They demanded he resign the arbiter's seat, and Kell, ancient and cornered, did something none of them predicted. He agreed that the fault was his. He stood before the closed session and said, "According to my sources, I laughed first, and you laughed with me, and now we all pretend the laughter had a single mouth. Very well. If the fault is mine, then the repair is mine also. I will go to Earth myself. And if I return with nothing, you may have my seat, and my titles, and whatever else comforts you while the stations stand empty." It was, I am told, the first time in 400 years that a high arbiter had wagered his position on anything. The chamber let him go. Pride, in the end, was cheaper to spend than the galaxy. I closed the journal, and I slept 2 hours, and when I woke, Laura was standing at my door with a strange expression on her face and a message tablet in her hand. "Ma'am," she said, "it's him." "Him who?" She held out the tablet. High Arbiter Kell of the Vithari, leader of the Galactic Council, the being who had read our dead as entertainment, was formally requesting passage to Earth. Not a summons to his chamber, not a delegation to my embassy. He was asking to come to us, to our world. In 60 years, no High Arbiter had ever set foot on Earth. They had never considered it worth the journey. Laura watched me read the request twice. "What do we tell him?" she asked. "The letter?" I looked out the window at the rising suns for a long moment. "No," I said. "Not the letter. Tell him Earth grants passage." And then I smiled for the first time in days, because I could already see the shape of what came next. "One condition," I added. "He comes alone. No aides, no guards, no delegation. If he wants to speak to Earth, he will stand on our soil the way I stood in his chamber. By himself." Laura's eyes went wide, and then, slowly, she grinned. She was learning. Sending it now, she said. The reply came back in under an hour, which told me everything about how desperate the council had become. 3 words only. Kell accepts. Alone. His ship landed outside the city of York on a gray morning, with low clouds and a light rain, which I considered a perfect introduction to Earth. S.S. Kell came down the ramp alone, as agreed, wearing plain travel robes instead of his council finery. Without the great chamber around him, without the circles of delegates rising at his entrance, he looked different, smaller, older. His silver skin was dulled by our soft gray light, and his 4 golden eyes kept moving, taking in the wet fields, the stone walls, the ordinary human world he had ruled over in ignorance for so long. He expected a negotiation. I could see it in the way he carried himself, the way his hands were already arranged for formal talks. He had come with numbers in his head, offers, packages, the currency of his entire long life. I did not take him to a negotiating table. I took him on a walk. "Ambassador," he said carefully, as we left the landing field. I had assumed we would speak somewhere official. "We will speak as we go," I said. "There are things on Earth you need to see. Consider it a tour. You gave me 5 minutes in your chamber once. I am giving you a full day in my world. You will find we are generous with time here." He was too intelligent to argue. He inclined his head, and he followed. I chose every stop on that tour the way a jeweler chooses stones. Nothing was accidental. If you are ever in my position, remember this. Never tell a proud man he is wrong. Show him, and let his own mind do the cutting. The first stop was a long wall of dark granite on a hillside above the sea. The rain had eased, and the stone was wet and shining. Carved into that granite, in letters filled with gold, were names. Hundreds of names, arranged in neat columns, with room left for more, because Earth is honest about the future. Siskel walked along the wall slowly. "What is this place?" he asked. "This is the memorial of the Meridian Gate," I said. "Every human who was lost holding it is carved here." I let him walk a few more steps, and then I said quietly, "You have met some of them before. You read their names aloud in the council chamber. You may notice the difference in presentation. Here, we carve them in stone and gold. There, they were read for laughter." He stopped walking. His hand, which had been reaching toward the stone, froze in the air and slowly came back down. For a long moment, he stood in the sea wind, and I watched a being from the proudest species in the galaxy read the name of the pilot from Kenya, 23 years old, and beneath it, the words she chose in her final message, which her family asked us to carve. The words were, "Tell them it was worth it if the families made it through." The families made it through, I said. 1,100 alien civilians on that cargo vessel. Drell, mostly. Some core. She never learned their names, and they never learned hers. You are the first member of the council ever to read it. He said nothing at the wall, but when we walked on, his hands were no longer arranged for negotiation. The second stop was a school, an ordinary one, in an ordinary town, chosen precisely because there was nothing special about it. We stood at the back of a classroom while 30 human children, around 9 years old, practiced their lessons. They were studying the Vithari language. Their small voices worked through the difficult sounds with great seriousness, and on the walls hung their drawings of Vithari cities, copied lovingly from library books. Seskel watched them for a long time. "Why do they learn our language?" he finally asked. "There has never been a requirement." "There is no requirement," I agreed. "We teach our children the languages of the council because we believe you cannot respect a neighbor you refuse to understand. Every human school does this. It has been our custom for 60 years. Then I asked him the question I had been saving, the one I had carried for 3 decades. "High Arbiter, in 60 years, how many Vithari schools have taught a single human word?" He is an ancient being from an ancient species, and his mind is faster than mine. He saw the whole shape of it at once, and he could not hide the flinch. The answer was none, and we both knew it, and I did not make him say it out loud. Some silences do more work than speeches. Between the school and the yards, we flew for an hour over open country, and Sci-Fi asked me questions I never expected from him. He asked how humans grieve. He asked why our memorial wall left empty space, and when I explained that we leave room because we refuse to pretend the future is safe, he was silent for a long while. Then he said something I wrote down that same night, word for word. "My species measures wisdom in centuries survived," he said. "Yours measures it in truths admitted. I begin to suspect your measure is the older one." I did not answer. Some admissions should be allowed to stand alone in the air, unhandled. The third stop was the one he did not expect. I took him to the shipyards. We flew over them at low altitude in a small transport, and I watched his 4 eyes widen as the yards rolled beneath us, kilometer after kilometer, dock after dock, and in every dock, a ship under construction. Not old designs, new ones. Sleek hulls with engine housings of a type he had never seen, sensor arrays of unfamiliar patterns, frames built for deep space and long range. He pressed close to the window. "Ambassador," he said slowly, "the Council Registry lists Earth's fleet as modest. These yards, this scale, this technology," he turned to me. "Where did all this come from?" "From 60 years of homework," I said. "Think about what you gave us, High Arbiter. You gave us the relay stations, so our engineers spent 60 years inside the galaxy's communication technology. You gave us the rescue accord, so our crews learned the engineering of every species' ships, because you cannot save a vessel you do not understand. You gave us the quarantine duty, so our doctors studied the biology of every race in the Council. You gave us the frontier patrols, so our people mapped the deep dark better than anyone alive." I let that settle, and then I finished the thought. "You handed the youngest species in the galaxy every dirty job you had, and every dirty job was a classroom. We did the work, and we took notes. 60 years of notes. You never asked what we were learning, because you never imagined we could learn." He stared down at the yards for the rest of the flight and did not speak. There was a fourth stop, one I had not planned, and it did more work than the 3 I had. As our transport crossed the coast, Sci-Fi noticed a sprawling white complex by the water and asked what it was. It was the Bridgewater Institute, our largest center for the medicine of other species, and on an impulse I trusted, I told the pilot to land. Inside, I let him walk the wards. Even with the treaties gone, even with every obligation burned, the hospital was full. Osani elders recovering from the sickness of their homeworld, tended by human doctors who spoke to them in their own tongue, a core child in a special chamber matched to her world's atmosphere, playing a counting game with a human nurse named Alice Turner, both of them laughing at mistakes in 2 languages. Sci-Fi stopped at the door of that room for a long time. "These patients," he said quietly. "Your withdrawal ended the medical treaties a month ago. Why are they still here?" I looked at him with genuine surprise, because the question had honestly never occurred to me, or to anyone on Earth. "They are sick," I said. "Where would you have us send them?" He had no answer. There was no answer. And I watched him understand, in front of a hospital room door, the thing no tour of memorials or shipyards could fully teach. The treaties had never been the reason. The treaties had only ever been the receipt. We landed as evening came, at a quiet coastal station, and it was there, over a simple meal that he barely touched, that Sci-Fi finally set down his pride. He did it with more grace than I expected, and I record that honestly, because this story has villains enough without me inventing more. He folded his long hands on the table, looked at me with all 4 eyes, and asked the real question at last, the one he had crossed the galaxy to ask. "Ambassador Carter, what do you want? Name it. The seat, reparations, formal apologies before the full assembly. Whatever Earth requires, I am authorized to grant. What do you want?" And I gave him the true answer. "Nothing you can give in a room," I said. "Chairs, payments, apologies, those are furniture. We want the thing that cannot be signed. We want the galaxy to remember this month, every time it hears a human name, for the next 1,000 years. And that, High Arbiter, is already being arranged, with no help needed from you." He absorbed that quietly. Then he surprised me. He said, "The laughter that day. You should know that I have replayed it many times since." He paused, searching, and for once the great orator struggled for words. "We are an old people, Ambassador, and old things forget that they were ever young, ever small, ever mocked. When we laughed at your dead, we were not strong, we were forgetting. It is the disease of the old, and we caught it centuries ago, and your Article 7 was the first medicine strong enough to make us feel it." It was not an apology, not quite. It was something rarer. It was understanding. I nodded once, accepting it for what it was. And that might have been the end of the evening, and the story might have wound down gently from there, if Laura had not come through the door, at that exact moment, with a face like winter. "Ma'am," she said, "priority signal from the Southern Array. You need to see this now, both of you." Here is what the Council had forgotten in its 30 days of panic over lagging messages and looted cargo. The Frontier Patrol Treaty had never been about pirates. Pirates were the small threat. The true purpose of those human crews on the far rim, the reason the sensor lines pointed outward into the great dark beyond known space, was to watch for the devourers. If you have never heard the name, be glad. They are not a species you negotiate with. They are a migration, a living storm of hive ships, billions of creatures moving as one, that crosses the empty space between galaxies once in 1,000 years and strips every world in its path down to bare rock. The Council's own histories record the last passing, long before Earth ever reached the stars. Entire civilizations in the old records simply stop, mid-sentence. The rim sensor net existed to give the galaxy early warning, years of warning, enough time to prepare, and for 30 days, since the withdrawal, the Council's net had been dark. Nobody had maintained it. Nobody had watched its screens. But Earth had never trusted anyone else with our safety. Alongside the Council's net, quietly, we had built our own. Our arrays had stayed on through everything, watched by human eyes every hour of those 30 days, because we do not stop watching the dark just because we are angry at the neighbors. Laura put the data on the table screen. Siskel leaned forward, and I watched the color drain out of his silver skin. The reading was unmistakable. A mass of ships beyond counting, moving out of the intergalactic dark, on a course bending toward the Concorde's border stars. Not in some distant century. The leading edge would reach the frontier in under a year. Eskel stared at the screen, and when he spoke, his voice was barely air. 30 days, he whispered. Our net has been dark for 30 days. If your arrays had been off as well, we would not have known until they were upon us. He looked up at me, and all the age of his species was in his eyes. Ambassador, I came here to ask you back into our council. He gestured at the screen with a trembling hand. I see now I will leave asking you to save it. I stood, and I picked up the data tablet, and I held it out to him. Then ask, I said. He asked. He stood in that small coastal station, the leader of the proudest species in the galaxy, and he asked Earth for help with nothing in his hands. No treaty to invoke, no clause to cite, no payment to promise, because what payment matches survival? He asked the way the stranded passenger ship had asked, on an open channel, hoping someone decent was listening. And Earth answered the way Margaret Hale had answered. I have thought about this many times since, and I believe it is the most important part of my whole story, so let me say it plainly. We did not go back because we were obligated. Every obligation was gone. I had burned them all myself, in alphabetical order. We went because when someone calls for help, humans go. That is not a treaty. That was never a treaty. The treaties were just paperwork wrapped around something that was already true. The Council had spent 60 years believing our service was purchased. Now they would watch us give it freely, and finally understand what they had been laughing at. Earth's government met through the night. By morning, the answer was official, and I delivered it to Siskel myself before his ship departed. Earth will mobilize, I told him. Our fleet, our crews, our arrays, on one condition only. Humanity commands its own forces. We will coordinate with the Council fleet, but we will not be placed at the front of someone else's battle plan ever again. When humans take the dangerous position now, it will be because we chose it." "Agreed," he said instantly. "And Ambassador," he added, "the Council fleet is not what it was. Your withdrawal exposed how much of our strength was borrowed. I fear you will see it for yourself." I did see it for myself. 8 months later, I stood on the command deck of the Resolute, the flagship of the new Earth fleet, as the combined defense of the galaxy gathered above a border world called Threshold, the first inhabited system in the path of the swarm. I was there as Earth's chief envoy to the Joint Command, which is the official way of saying I had talked my way aboard, because after everything, I could not bear to watch this from behind a desk. Skell had told the truth. The Council fleet was large but tangled. 11 flag officers from 11 species, each with different battle languages, different signals, different doctrines that had all assumed, for 60 years, that human crews would fill the gaps. Their supply lines snarled, their formations drifted. They were not weak, but they were a crowd, and a crowd is not an army. The Earth fleet arrived in the middle of that confusion, like a written sentence appearing in a page of scribbles. 200 new ships from those secret yards, crewed by the people who had run the galaxy's hardest stations for 3 generations. Relay engineers who could make any 2 systems talk to each other. Rescue veterans who knew the airlocks and corridors of every species' ships by heart. Rim patrollers who had studied the dark longer than anyone. Within 1 week, human coordination teams were aboard every major Council vessel, quietly untangling the knots, and the crowd began, slowly, to become an army. Admiral Grace Holloway commanded our fleet. She was a former rescue captain, which the Council officers found strange until they understood it, and then they found it frightening, because Earth's battle doctrine, the doctrine she wrote, was built on a single idea that no other fleet in the galaxy had ever made its foundation. Nobody gets left behind. Not our crews. Not yours. Nobody. I should tell you about one officer aboard the Resolute, because history is carried by people, not fleets. Her name was Lieutenant Ruth Adeyemi, 26 years old, a communications specialist, and she was the younger sister of the pilot from Kenya, whose name Sis Kell had once read aloud for laughter. She had requested this posting. Everyone aboard knew who she was, and nobody spoke of it, in the way of crews who understand that some things are carried best in silence. In the week before the swarm arrived, it was Ruth who solved the fleet's worst problem, the tangle of 11 battle languages, by building a single translation relay from 60 years of human records of every species' signals. When the Council flag officers asked how one junior lieutenant had done in 6 days what their combined staffs had failed to do in 6 months, Admiral Holloway gave the answer that went around the fleet by nightfall. Her family, the Admiral said, has a tradition of doing impossible things for people who never said thank you. We are hoping to break half of that tradition this week. On the final night before contact, I found Ruth alone in the observation gallery, looking out at the waiting dark. I did not know what to say to her, so I said the truth. "Your sister's name is carved in gold above a gray sea," I told her, "and the man who once laughed at it now knows it by heart." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Tomorrow we will show him what the rest of the family can do." The swarm reached Threshold on a quiet morning, ship time. I will not describe the fighting in detail, because the details belong to the people who lived them, and I was only a witness at the back of a command deck. But I will tell you what I saw, because what I saw explained 60 years of history better than any speech I ever gave. I saw the swarm come out of the dark like weather, a front of hive ships so vast the sensors struggled to frame it. I saw the Council lines waver, because no drill prepares you for a living storm. And I saw the human fleet move toward the danger, in good order, without hesitation, exactly as human crews had done at the Meridian Gate, exactly as Margaret Hale had done alone in her cargo ship, exactly as we had always done. But this time was different in one way that mattered. This time, the galaxy was watching with new eyes. When a core cruiser lost its engines and drifted out of formation into the path of the swarm, its crew sent what they believed was their final message. Then 3 human ships, peeled out of the safety of the line, flew into the closing gap, took the cruiser under tow, and hauled it home, while their gun crews held off the swarm's leading edge. The core crew, 400 souls, watched through their windows as strangers risked everything to bring them back. When the tow lines released, and the cruiser slid into the shelter of the fleet, the core captain broadcast on the open channel, to everyone, his voice breaking. "Why?" he kept asking. "You owed us nothing. We voted against you. Why?" And Admiral Holloway's answer went out on that same open channel, heard by every ship of every species in the fleet. 11 words that I suspect will outlive everyone who heard them. Because someone called for help. What kind of question is that? On the first day, the fleet learned what it faced. The swarm did not attack the way a fleet attacks. It flowed, filling space the way water fills a valley, probing every gap at once, and the joint line bent and shivered under the pressure of 1,000 small collisions. Ruth Adeyemi's translation relay carried a river of voices in 11 languages, and slowly, hour by hour, the river found a rhythm. Ships that had never trained together began to move together. By nightfall of the first day, the line no longer shivered. It breathed. The second day belonged to the engineers. The swarm shifted its pressure toward threshold itself, where 200 million civilians of 9 different species sheltered underground, listening to the sky. The fleet's shield vessels needed to interlock their defenses above the planet, a maneuver never attempted between species, because every race's shields sang at a different frequency. It was the human relay engineers, the veterans of 60 years on the deep stations, who tuned them into a single chord. When the interlocked shield lit up across the sky of threshold, visible from the ground as a slow aurora of many colors, the civilians in the shelters below stood and watched it through the vents, and parents of 9 species told their children the same sentence in 9 languages. That light is the fleet. Sleep now. And the third day. The third day is the one I will carry forever, because on the third day, the galaxy repaid a debt 60 years old. A human destroyer, the Halifax, took a strike to her engines while covering the shield line and began to drift out, alone, into the flowing dark, exactly as the core cruiser had drifted on the first day. Every human ship nearby was locked into the shield formation and could not break away without opening a gap above 200 million people. Admiral Holloway's voice on the command deck was steady, but I was standing close enough to see her hands. And then, before she could even ask, the channel filled with voices that were not human. The renamed core cruiser, answered, was already moving, and behind her came 2 Osani frigates and a Drell gunship, ships whose species had laughed in a chamber 60 years in the making, flying now into the closing dark for a human crew. They took the Halifax under tow. They held off the swarm's edge with everything they had. They brought her home, and when the tow lines released, it was the core captain's voice on the open channel again, and this time he was not asking a question. He was answering one. "Now we understand," he said. "It was never duty. It never once was duty. Someone called for help." I looked across the command deck at Ruth Adeyemi, who had lost a sister to a galaxy that laughed, and I watched her listen to alien crews risking everything for humans, and I saw her wipe her eyes once, quickly, and return to her station. Some walls come down in chambers, with documents and speeches. The real ones come down in the dark, between ships. The battle lasted 4 days. The plan, built by human coordinators and agreed by all 11 flag officers, did not try to destroy the swarm, because you do not destroy weather. It turned the swarm. Human rim patrol data, 60 years of quiet notes about the deep dark, revealed what the swarm sought and what it avoided, and the fleet used that knowledge to bend the migration's course, degree by degree, away from the inhabited stars and back out into the empty dark between galaxies. On the 4th day, the storm's edge curved past threshold and away, and the long-range scans confirmed it. The course would miss every settled world. The galaxy would live. The cost was real, and I will not pretend otherwise. Ships were lost. Names were added to walls. human names and alien names now carved side by side, and if you visit the memorial at Threshold today, you will find them listed together, in one alphabet, at Earth's request. But the swarm passed, and the worlds behind us never even saw it, and their children slept through the whole affair, which is the only victory that ever really counts. Before I left Threshold, I attended the dedication of the joint memorial, still half-built, on a hill above the planet's largest shelter. There were no officials on the program that day, no ambassadors, no speeches from people like me, which I considered exactly right. Instead, a child from each of the 9 sheltered species placed a single stone at the base of the wall, and last of all came Ruth Adeyemi, in dress uniform, carrying a small piece of dark granite that had traveled with her from Earth. It was cut from the same quarry as the wall above the gray northern sea. She set it among the other stones, so that a piece of the Meridian Gate Memorial would rest forever inside the Threshold Memorial, one wall reaching across the galaxy to touch the other. Nobody had asked her to explain it, and she did not, but every crew in the fleet knew, and every one of them walked past that dark stone on the way out, and many of them, of every species, touched it as they went. Grief, I have learned, is the first language every species shares. Respect is simply grief that arrived in time. In the weeks after the swarm turned, something changed across the galaxy that no treaty could have ordered. On 100 worlds, in 100 languages, the story of Threshold was told and retold, and always it circled the same details. The 3 ships that flew into the gap, the tow lines that held, 11 words on an open channel. In the Vithari capital, for the first time in recorded history, a school began teaching a human language, and within a month there was a waiting list. The Corps renamed the rescued cruiser. Its new name, in their tongue, translates as answered, and on Threshold itself, the survivors of every species began building the memorial together, without waiting for any government to approve it, because some things people simply know they must do. I received thousands of messages in those weeks, but the one I answered first was 3 sentences long, through very quiet channels, addressed to Ves Orin of the Vithari. "You were right about him," I wrote. "Thank you for teaching me the difference between winning an argument and winning a future. Earth owes you a debt it will never publicly acknowledge, which I suspect is exactly how you prefer it." 6 weeks later, I stood once more at the speaker's platform in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. The room was full, 200 species, every seat taken, and this time there were humans in the gallery, veterans of Threshold in dress uniform, invited by the Council itself. Siskel opened the session, and the Council offered Earth everything: the seat on the security tier, permanent and immediate, reparations for 60 years of unequal service, a formal apology, read into the eternal record, the restoration of all 91 treaties on any terms we cared to name. And I stood at the platform where they had once laughed at me, and I declined all of it. Not the friendship, I was careful to say, only the furniture. The old treaties are gone, I told them, and they should stay gone, because they were built on a mistake. They were built on the idea that some species serve and other species sit. Earth will not restore that world with our own signatures. We have something better. I placed one document on the platform, a single page. We had drafted it on the journey home from Threshold, and I had polished it the way I once polished a certain famous letter, until every word shone. "It is called the Terran Compact," I said, "and it is short enough to read in 1 minute, which is intentional, because things that take 1,000 pages to say are usually hiding something. It has 3 articles. Article 1, every member stands equal, with no tiers, no inner circles, no back rows. Article 2, an emergency call from any member is answered by all members, and the answer begins before the argument about cost. Article 3, and I ask you to listen closely to this one." The chamber was silent in a way I had never heard it. Even the translators seemed to hold their breath. "Article 3, I said, any member species may withdraw from this compact at any time, fully and immediately, by open declaration, no vote, no notice, no approval. I looked up from the page and around the great rising circles of the chamber, at all the faces that had once laughed and now listened. "You will recognize the wording," I said. "It is Article 7, given to everyone. Some of you may wonder why Earth would hand every species the same door we walk through. Here is why. A union that must lock its doors is a prison. A union whose doors stand open is a choice, renewed every single day, by everyone inside. Dignity should never again require our example. It should be built into the walls." I signed the compact first, with Arthur Finch's old pen, and I said his name out loud as I did it, so that it would enter the eternal record beside mine. The man they had all called a fool, whose one small clause had turned the galaxy, deserved to be present in the only way I could arrange. Then I stepped back, and I waited to see who, if anyone, would sign second. Skell rose from the arbiter's high seat. He came down, level by level, the long way, past every delegation, and the chamber watched him descend in absolute silence. He reached the platform, took the pen, and signed the Terran Compact directly beneath my name. Then he turned to the assembly, and he did not give a speech. He simply stood beside me, facing them all, and waited. The Drell delegation rose first, then the Corps, all of them, led by the captain from the drifting cruiser, who I am told had petitioned for a place in the chamber that day. Then the Osani, then the smaller species in a wave, then the proud old ones, section by section, circle by circle, until the entire chamber of the Galactic Council was on its feet, 200 species standing in unison. I stood where I had stood on the day of the laughter, in the exact same spot, and I let myself remember it one last time. The sound rolling down from the high circles, the cold filling me like ice water, the list I made of every laughing face. They mocked us once, in unison. Now they stand the same way, in unison, and one by one they are coming down the long aisle to sign their names beneath ours. I have learned, over 30 years and one extraordinary season, to prefer the silence of a chamber that is standing to the noise of a chamber that laughs. And if you ever find yourself where I stood, small and mocked and far from home, remember an old man with a worn blue book, and remember this. You do not answer laughter with shouting. You answer it with a list, read calmly, in alphabetical order. You answer it by knowing your worth so completely that you can walk away from everything and let the silence you leave behind do all the talking. The galaxy learned our worth the hard way, but it learned, and carved on a granite wall above a gray northern sea, a young pilot's last words turned out to be true after all. It was worth it. The families made it through.